Big Shaq had it all: wealth, power, and a spotless reputation, until a cop accused him of stealing his own heavy bike. But this isn't just a misunderstanding, it's a setup. As the media turns against him and his closest allies vanish, he uncovers a corrupt police force, a secret smuggling ring, and an old enemy pulling the strings. Someone powerful wants him gone, and the deeper he digs, the more dangerous it gets. Now Shaq must choose: walk away or expose the truth, no matter the cost. Watch now to uncover the truth before it's too late. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us, where are you watching from? Share in the comments below. The late afternoon sun hung low over the city, casting long shadows across the Black Hawk Diner parking lot. The air smelled of fried food, motor oil, and gasoline. A familiar mix for Big Shaq, who had just finished his usual Sunday lunch. The deep rumble of engines filled the space as bikers came and went, their heavy machines glinting under the fading sunlight. Shaq adjusted the sleeves of his black leather jacket, his muscular frame moving with effortless confidence. He wasn't just another biker, he was a legend in the community. His custom-built heavy bike, a matte black beast with chrome accents and a roaring V-twin engine, was the kind of ride that turned heads. It wasn't just a bike, it was his identity. As he stepped toward his motorcycle, reaching into his pocket for the keys, a voice cut through the parking lot like a siren. "Hey, step away from the bike." Shaq turned, eyebrows furrowing. A police officer, mid-40s, tall, lean, Officer Logan Hale, was striding toward him, one hand resting on his duty belt, the other raised in warning. Behind him, a man in a wrinkled button-down shirt and cargo shorts stood with his arms crossed, his face twisted with self-righteous certainty. "That's him." The man, a bystander, pointed at Shaq, voice sharp. "I saw him messing with the bike. He was trying to steal it." For a second, Shaq thought it was a joke. Then he saw the tension in Logan's stance, the way his fingers hovered near his radio. A slow, simmering heat built in Shaq's chest. "Man, you've got this all wrong," Shaq said, voice calm but firm. "This is my bike." The officer didn't move. "Sir, I need you to step away," Logan ordered. Shaq narrowed his eyes, his jaw clenching. "I'm telling you, this is my damn bike." Logan's radio crackled. "Dispatch, got a possible 1016, vehicle theft in progress." Shaq felt the shift instantly. The weight of assumptions, bias, and the power imbalance settled onto his shoulders like an invisible force. A few bystanders stopped to watch, some pulling out their phones. Shaq slowly reached into his jacket pocket. "I got my registration right here." Logan tensed. Shaq noticed. Wrong move. He froze mid-motion, lifting his hand slightly. "It's just my wallet, officer." A moment passed, one that felt heavier than it should have. Then Logan nodded. Slowly, Shaq pulled out his wallet, flipping it open to the registration papers and title. He handed them over, his pulse steady, but his mind racing. Logan took them, glancing at the documents. Then, instead of handing them back, he frowned. Shaq caught the shift. Something was off. Logan looked at him, expression unreadable. "You say this is your bike?" Shaq's patience thinned. "That's what I've been saying." The bystander scoffed. "Man, just admit it, you got caught." Shaq turned his head slowly, fixing the man with a look that could crack concrete. "Who the hell are you, anyway?" The man lifted his chin. "I saw you lurking around the lot earlier." Shaq exhaled sharply through his nose. "I was eating inside." Logan ignored the exchange, stepping back and pressing his radio. "Dispatch. I need a verification on a motorcycle title. Plate number." He read it off the registration. Another pause. Shaq folded his arms. "So, what now? You gonna run my name too?" Logan didn't answer. A few bystanders whispered amongst themselves. Shaq could feel the moment dragging out, stretching into something unnatural. Then Logan's radio crackled again. Plate registered to Donovan Shaquille Hayes. No reports of theft. A few people in the crowd shifted. The bystander, now exposed as a liar, took a step back. Shaq took a slow breath, controlling the anger curling in his chest. "We good now?" he asked, voice clipped. Logan hesitated. Then he did something that sent a chill down Shaq's spine. Instead of handing back the papers, he tucked them into his pocket. The air changed. Shaq straightened. "What the hell are you doing?" Logan's face was unreadable. "Sir, I need you to come with me for further questioning." Shaq barked a humorless laugh. "Questioning for what? I just proved the bike is mine." Logan didn't flinch. "We have reason to believe this vehicle may be connected to an open case." Shaq's pulse spiked. "An open case?" The crowd murmured, confused but intrigued. Shaq's patience snapped like a worn-out chain. "I don't know what game you're playing, but I'm not going anywhere." Logan's jaw tightened. "Sir, I suggest you cooperate." "Or what?" Shaq challenged, stepping closer. More phones went up, cameras rolling. The buzz of viral attention thickened the air. Then Logan said something that made Shaq's stomach turn. "The bike isn't the only thing we're looking at, Mr. Hayes." A sharp, cold silence followed. Shaq felt the shift before he understood it. This wasn't just a traffic stop. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was something else. Something planned. Shaq's eyes locked onto Logan's, searching for a flicker of truth. And for the first time in years, he felt a sinking certainty that he was in deeper trouble than he had ever imagined. The sun dipped lower behind the buildings, shadows stretching across the parking lot. The crowd held its breath. And Big Shaq realized he had just stepped into something far bigger than a stolen bike. Something he might not walk away from. The air in the parking lot felt thick, buzzing with an invisible tension that hadn't been there moments ago. The smell of gasoline, grilled food, and hot asphalt clung to the air, but Shaq wasn't paying attention to any of it now. All he could see was Officer Logan Hale, standing between him and his bike like a brick wall. Shaq had been in plenty of situations where people made assumptions about him. Being 6 feet 4 inches with a frame like a linebacker, covered in leather, and standing next to a motorcycle that could outrun a police cruiser, meant that people often looked twice. He was used to the lingering stares, the suspicious glances. But this wasn't normal. Logan had his hands on his belt, not quite reaching for his cuffs, but not relaxed either. The bystander who had accused Shaq stood a few feet behind the officer, arms crossed, chin raised like he'd just done something noble. Shaq kept his voice steady. "I already told you, this is my bike." Logan didn't budge. "Sir, I need you to come with me for further questioning." Shaq blinked. "For what?" Logan didn't answer right away. Instead, he just stared, his jaw clenched so tightly Shaq swore he could hear the man's teeth grinding. Shaq exhaled sharply. "You checked my registration. My name is on the damn title. What exactly am I being questioned for?" The crowd had thickened now. A few bikers from the diner were watching closely, arms folded, some shaking their heads. Someone else had started recording. Then came the voice that Shaq didn't expect. "Yo, y'all know that's Big Shaq, right? The dude's got money. Why the hell would he steal a bike?" Logan's face didn't shift, but his fingers twitched. A subtle nervous tick. Shaq noticed. This wasn't about the bike. This was something else. Before Shaq even stepped toward the cruiser, the internet had already exploded. Free Big Shaq was trending within minutes. Clips of the incident flooded Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Some people were furious, calling it racial profiling, abuse of power. Others were spinning it differently, implying that Shaq had a criminal past, that maybe there was more to the story. Then came the news sites. Headlines flashed across Shaq's phone screen in real time. Breaking, motorcycle theft investigation, millionaire caught in shocking incident. Big Shaq detained over alleged stolen vehicle. What really happened? The media wasn't waiting for the truth. They were running with whatever version of the story got them the most clicks. Shaq sat in the back of the squad car, arms folded across his chest, his jaw clenched so tight it hurt. Outside, Logan was talking into his radio, his back to the vehicle. Shaq couldn't hear what was being said, but he could see the tension in Logan's shoulders, the way his fingers kept flexing and releasing like a man wrestling with something big. The doors locked automatically as Logan got in the front seat. The metallic click of it sent a shiver down Shaq's spine. He glanced out the window, tracking the streets. Then he frowned. They weren't going the right way. Shaq had been to the station before. He knew the route. They should have turned left at the last intersection. Instead, Logan took a right. toward the warehouse district. Shaq leaned forward slightly. Yo, where we going? Logan didn't answer right away. His grip on the wheel was too tight. Shaq's stomach turned. He had spent his life reading people, in business, in fights, in every high-stakes situation imaginable. And right now, Logan wasn't acting like a cop bringing someone in for questioning. He was acting like a man being forced to do something he didn't want to do. Shaq's pulse ticked up. Logan, where the hell are we going? Logan exhaled through his nose. Just relax. Shaq's eyes narrowed. Relax? Nothing about this was relaxing. The buildings outside changed. Gone were the usual bustling city streets. Instead, the roads turned quieter, darker. Warehouses lined the sides, their windows either shattered or boarded up. Shaq's heart thumped hard in his chest. This isn't the station, he said, his voice low and sharp. Logan said nothing. Shaq sat forward now, his instincts screaming. Pull the damn car over. Logan swallowed but kept driving. Shaq felt something cold settle in his gut. Then Logan's phone buzzed. The officer flinched, glanced at the screen, and his entire body went rigid. Shaq watched as Logan hesitated before finally picking it up. A single text message was on the screen. He's asking questions. Handle it. Shaq's breath stilled. Slowly, Logan turned off the phone and gripped the wheel harder. Shaq exhaled, slow and measured. Who sent that? Logan's knuckles went white. You don't want to know. Shaq's heart pounded. You need to pull this damn car over. Right now. Logan kept driving, eyes locked on the road. And that's when Shaq realized Logan wasn't in control of this. Someone else was. Finally, the car pulled into an empty lot behind an abandoned auto shop. Shaq's mind was racing, calculating, searching for angles. The second the car stopped, he knew he wasn't just being questioned anymore. This was something much, much bigger. Logan put the car in park, but didn't move. He just sat there, gripping the wheel like a man holding on to the last piece of sanity he had left. The silence stretched. Then, without looking back, Logan spoke. You're in trouble, Shaq. Shaq's jaw tightened. Number you are. Logan exhaled through his nose. Then slowly, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out Shaq's registration papers. Only now, there was something new attached to them. A police report. Shaq grabbed it and scanned the first few lines. Then his stomach dropped. His bike wasn't just flagged, it had been tied to a crime. An open case, a major theft ring. Shaq's pulse hammered. This is a setup. Logan finally turned, and for the first time his mask cracked. This goes way higher than me, Logan admitted, his voice rough. Shaq's breath slowed. Who's behind this? Logan's throat bobbed. I don't know. But what I do know, they want you gone. Shaq clenched his fists. Why? Logan swallowed. Then, voice barely above a whisper. Because you got too close to something you weren't supposed to. Shaq's skin prickled. He hadn't been investigating anything. He hadn't been involved in anything. So what the hell was this really about? The air inside the station was stale, thick with the scent of burnt coffee and disinfectant. Shaq had been here before, not as a suspect, but as a visitor, bailing out friends who had gotten into minor trouble. This time was different. This time, he was the one being processed. The officer at the front desk barely looked up as Logan led Shaq through the heavy doors. The few other officers scattered around the station cast quick glances, their expressions unreadable. Shaq couldn't tell if they recognized him from the news already, or if they were just used to seeing men like him in handcuffs. Logan hadn't said a word since they pulled into the lot. He was tense, his posture rigid, his jaw locked so tight Shaq thought it might crack under the pressure. Shaq wasn't nervous, he was furious. Take these off, he muttered, glancing down at the cuffs on his wrists. Logan didn't respond right away. He exchanged a look with the desk sergeant, then reluctantly pulled out the key and unlocked the cuffs. The metal snapped open, leaving red marks around Shaq's wrists. He rolled his shoulders, flexing his fingers, exhaling slowly to keep his temper in check. This is a waste of everyone's time, Shaq said, rubbing his wrists. Logan's jaw twitched. Just sit tight. Yeah, I'll do that, Shaq said, his voice flat. since I got nowhere else to be. The interrogation room was smaller than Shaq expected, claustrophobic, windowless, built to make people feel trapped. The metal chair was cold, the single light overhead flickering slightly. Across from him sat Detective Eric Monroe, a man in his mid-50s with tired eyes, graying hair, and a reputation for making people sweat. He leaned back in his chair, a file in front of him, unopened. Logan stood by the door, arms crossed, his face blank. Shaq sat with his arms on the table, his posture relaxed but his mind racing. He wasn't going to let them see frustration on his face. He had nothing to hide. "Let's start with the basics," Monroe said, finally opening the file. "Your name is Donovan Shaquille Hayes?" Shaq raised a brow. "You dragged me in here, and you don't even know my name." Monroe didn't react. He tapped a pen against the folder. "You were at Black Hawk Diner earlier today?" Shaq leaned back. "You already know I was." Monroe ignored the attitude. "And you were attempting to leave on a motorcycle, correct?" Shaq sighed. "My motorcycle." Monroe glanced at Logan, then back at the file. "And yet we received a tip that the bike had been reported stolen." Shaq's stomach tightened slightly, but he didn't let it show. "Let me guess. Anonymous tip?" Monroe nodded. "That's right." Shaq exhaled through his nose. "And that's enough to bring me in?" Monroe slid a photograph across the table. It was his bike, parked behind a rundown warehouse. The timestamp in the bottom corner was from 2 weeks ago. Shaq frowned. "What's this supposed to be?" Monroe tilted his head. "That bike matches your registration, but according to our records, it was linked to an active case involving stolen vehicles and illegal exports." Shaq's mind raced. His bike, tied to a crime. "That's impossible," he said, shaking his head. "That bike hasn't been out of my sight." Monroe studied him, silent. Then he dropped another photo onto the table. This one was grainier, taken at night. A figure stood next to the bike, slightly blurred. "Is that supposed to be me?" Shaq asked, staring at the image. Monroe didn't answer. Shaq barked a short, humorless laugh. "This is some serious BS. Can you account for your whereabouts 2 weeks ago?" Monroe asked, ignoring his reaction. Shaq narrowed his eyes. "Are you serious right now?" Monroe didn't blink. Shaq rubbed his jaw, thinking. 2 weeks ago? He had been in Miami for a business meeting. "Yeah, I was out of town," he said. "Plenty of people can confirm that." Monroe flipped through a few more pages in the file. "Funny, that's not what our source said." Shaq stilled. "Your source?" Monroe nodded. "An informant came forward, claims you've been involved in moving high-end stolen vehicles, says you use your status as cover, that no one would ever suspect you." Shaq stared at him. "And you believe that?" Monroe shrugged. "Doesn't matter what I believe. What matters is the evidence." Shaq exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "So let me get this straight. Someone claims I stole my own bike, and now suddenly I'm running a smuggling ring." Monroe closed the file. "I'm just following the facts." Shaq folded his arms. "You're following a setup." Monroe's face remained unreadable, but Logan shifted slightly by the door. Shaq caught it. The smallest sign of doubt. The room was silent for a long moment. Then Shaq sat forward, locking eyes with Logan. "You know this is BS," he said. Logan didn't move. Shaq's voice lowered, steady, controlled. "You know it. And yet, here we are." Monroe cut in. "What exactly are you implying?" Shaq ignored him. "Logan, look me in the eye and tell me this isn't a setup." Logan hesitated for half a second too long. Shaq's pulse spiked. There it was. Something in Logan's expression shifted, something almost like regret. Shaq exhaled slowly, sitting back. "Huh." Monroe tapped the file. "We can keep you here for as long as we need to." Shaq smirked. "I don't think you can." Monroe raised a brow. Shaq gestured toward Logan. "Your guy over there? He's sweating. You don't get nervous unless you're hiding something." Logan stiffened. Shaq leaned forward. "So here's my guess. You got some bad intel. Someone higher up told you to bring me in, make a big deal out of this. Maybe you even believed it at first. But now, you're starting to wonder if you're on the wrong side. Logan exhaled sharply, looking away. Monroe's lips pressed into a thin line. You really think you're untouchable, don't you? Shaq shrugged. Number I just know when I'm being played. Monroe studied him. Then, after a long moment, he stood up. We'll be holding you while we verify your alibi, he said. Shaq smirked. You do that. As Monroe left, Logan hesitated. Then, without looking at Shaq, he slipped something onto the table, a scrap of paper. Then he turned and walked out. Shaq waited until the door clicked shut. Then he picked up the paper. One line, a phone number, and 3 words. You're not alone. Shaq exhaled, his pulse racing. Whatever was happening. Logan wasn't just involved. He was warning him. This wasn't about a stolen bike. This was something much bigger. And Shaq was officially in the middle of it. Shaq sat in the holding cell, staring at the tiny slip of paper Logan had left him. You're not alone. 3 words. A phone number. His instincts were screaming now. Who was playing who? If Logan was dirty, why would he help him? If he wasn't, then why was he leading this setup? None of it made sense. But Shaq knew one thing. He needed someone on the outside to start digging. And there was only one person he trusted for that. Jordan Cross. Shaq grabbed the payphone in the corner of the cell, dialing from memory. It rang once, twice. Then a smooth, confident voice picked up. Didn't think I'd be hearing from you today. Shaq exhaled. Yeah, well, things got complicated. A pause. Then Jordan's voice sharpened. What happened? Shaq leaned against the wall, lowering his voice. I need you to find out who just tried to set me up. Jordan Cross had a reputation. A private investigator, ex-cop, and the kind of guy who could find the truth even when people buried it 6 feet under. He and Shaq had been friends since high school, back when they both had something to prove. Jordan had always been the smart one, the guy who could read a room before he even stepped inside. After leaving the force, he built a career around finding what people didn't want him to find. And now, Shaq needed him more than ever. Jordan didn't ask unnecessary questions. I'm on it, he said, but tell me one thing. Who's the cop leading this? Shaq clenched his jaw. Logan Hale. A beat of silence. Then Jordan cursed under his breath. Yeah, that's bad. Shaq frowned. You know him? Jordan exhaled. Not personally, but his name's been floating around for a while. The kind of guy who's either really good at his job or really good at covering things up. Shaq's pulse kicked up. Find out which one he is. Jordan's voice was already distant, like he was pulling up files in his head. I'll start with the bike. If someone flagged it before today, we'll know why. Shaq nodded, even though Jordan couldn't see him. And Jordan? Yeah? Be careful. Jordan let out a short laugh. You know me. That was exactly what Shaq was afraid of. It took 3 hours before Jordan called back. Shaq had been released, but the storm outside the station was worse than inside. Paparazzi, news vans, cameras flashing. He kept his head down as he slid into his car, gripping the wheel tightly. Then his phone buzzed. Jordan's voice was sharp. You need to hear this. Shaq pulled into a parking lot away from the chaos. Talk to me. Jordan didn't waste time. Your bike was flagged 3 weeks ago in connection to a high-profile stolen goods operation. A chop shop moving high-end vehicles, cars, bikes, even boats. Shaq's fingers tightened on the steering wheel. That's impossible. My bike hasn't been out of my sight. Jordan continued. That's the thing. They weren't after your bike. They were after a cover. Someone inside the department linked your registration to a case you had nothing to do with. My guess? They needed a name big enough to cause a distraction. Shaq exhaled slowly. And Logan's involved? Jordan hesitated. Maybe, maybe not. But his name is in the case files, buried in the reports. Shaq's stomach turned. So he either knows who set me up, or he's part of it. Jordan was quiet for a second. Then, that's not all. Shaq braced himself. What? Jordan's voice dropped lower. There's someone else in these files, a name from your past. Shaq's pulse slowed. Who? Jordan hesitated. Then he said it. Elias Mercer. Shaq's breath caught. Elias Mercer, a name he hadn't heard in years, a name he never wanted to hear again. Jordan kept talking. I don't know how he's connected yet, but his name popped up in sealed court documents from 3 months ago. Someone pulled strings to bury whatever case he was involved in. Shaq ran a hand down his face. Elias Mercer was trouble. Always had been. Once, they had been business partners. Years ago, when Shaq was first building his empire. Mercer had been a brilliant investor with the personality of a shark. But he had connections in all the wrong places. Shaq had cut ties the moment he realized Mercer wasn't just playing in the gray areas. He was fully in the dark. And now his name was back, tied to Shaq's bike. Shaq's voice was tight. Find out why Mercer's name is in those files. Jordan sighed. I already started. But Shaq? Shaq tensed. What? Jordan's voice dropped lower. Someone's watching me. Shaq's blood ran cold. Where are you? Jordan was quiet for a second. At my office, but there's a car outside. Been there for the past hour. Shaq started his car. Get out of there. Jordan let out a dry chuckle. You think I'm stupid? I locked the place down 10 minutes ago, but listen. If I go dark for a while, don't come looking for me. It means I found something real. Shaq's jaw tightened. Jordan. A sudden crash sounded through the phone. Then static. Then nothing. Shaq's heart slammed against his ribs. Jordan. Silence. Shaq gripped the wheel, his mind racing. This was bigger than he thought. And now Jordan was in danger too. Shaq stepped out of the precinct, the cold night air hitting him like a slap. The world outside hadn't stopped while he was inside. News vans, flashing cameras, and people shouting questions swarmed the entrance like a pack of hungry wolves. He kept his head down, pulling the hood of his jacket over his head. The last thing he needed was to give them a headline. His phone vibrated in his pocket. A new message. It's bigger than the bike. Watch your back. Shaq's breath caught. The sender? Jordan. His fingers flew over the screen as he dialed. Voicemail. He tried again. Nothing. Shaq exhaled, his grip tightening around the phone. Something was wrong. Jordan wasn't the kind of guy to spook easy. If he was sending messages like this, it meant he had found something. Something big. And now, he was gone. Shaq climbed into his car, his mind racing. Everything about this was off. The setup. The false report. Logan's hesitation. Jordan's disappearance. He had to stop reacting and start thinking like the businessman he was. Follow the money. Follow the connections. He pulled out the slip of paper Logan had left him. The number was still there, staring back at him like a riddle waiting to be solved. Shaq tapped it into his phone. The line rang twice. Then someone answered. A voice he recognized instantly. Logan Hale. Shaq didn't waste time. Where's Jordan? A pause. Then Logan sighed. I was wondering when you'd call. Cut the games, man. He sent me a message and now he's missing. What the hell is going on? Logan exhaled sharply. Not over the phone. Meet me at the docks. 1 hour. Shaq's grip tightened on the wheel. Why should I trust you? Logan's voice was quiet. Because I'm the only one keeping you alive right now. The call ended. Shaq stared at the screen, his pulse hammering. He had a choice. He could run. He could disappear. He had the money, the power, the resources. Or he could go to that meeting. Face Logan. Face the truth. His jaw clenched. There was no choice. He had to see this through. The docks were almost deserted. Just the occasional flickering streetlight casting eerie shadows on the pavement. Shaq pulled up, shutting off his engine. The wind off the water carried the salty scent of the bay, mixing with the distant hum of cargo ships. Logan was waiting, hands in his jacket pockets, eyes scanning the area like a man who didn't trust his surroundings. Shaq stepped out, shutting the car door behind him. Start talking. Logan exhaled, shaking his head. You're in deeper than you think, Shaq. Shaq folded his arms. Then help me understand. Logan hesitated. Then, your bike was never stolen. It was planted. Shaq's stomach tightened. Why? Logan's gaze was unreadable. To keep you distracted. The weight of the words sank in. This was never about the bike. It was about Shaq. He took a slow step forward. Who's behind this? Logan hesitated again. Then he said the name. A name Shaq hadn't heard in years. Elias Mercer. The world tilted. Shaq inhaled slowly. That's not possible. Logan's expression hardened. It is. Mercer is pulling strings from the shadows. And whatever Jordan found, it got him taken off the board. Shaq's pulse pounded. You knew. Logan looked away. Not everything. Not at first. But once I saw your name pop up, I knew they were setting you up. And once I found out Mercer was involved, he exhaled. I had to make a choice. Shaq's hands curled into fists. And what choice was that? Logan met his eyes. Keeping you alive. A tense silence stretched between them. Then Logan pulled something from his pocket. A USB drive. This has everything Jordan sent before he went dark, Logan said, holding it out. I don't know how long you have before they come for you too. Shaq took the drive, feeling the weight of it. This was the proof, the missing piece. And it was about to change everything. The wind at the docks carried a chill, cutting through the damp air, but Shaq barely noticed. His mind raced, pieces clicking together too fast to process. Elias Mercer. The name alone made his stomach tighten. It had been years since Shaq had severed ties with him. He thought it was over. Thought he had put that chapter behind him. Apparently, Mercer hadn't. Logan stood in front of him, hands deep in his jacket pockets, his face tight with something that looked like regret. The kind of regret that came from knowing too much and saying too little for too long. Shaq clenched his jaw. Start talking. Logan didn't move. Shaq, once you know this, there's no turning back. Shaq stepped closer, his voice low. I crossed that line the moment they dragged me in for a crime I didn't commit. A long silence stretched between them. Then Logan sighed, running a hand over his face before finally meeting Shaq's eyes. Your bike wasn't flagged by accident. It was planted. And it wasn't just to mess with you. It was to cover up something a hell of a lot bigger. Shaq exhaled sharply. He had figured as much. But the part that wasn't making sense? Why him? Why now? He folded his arms. What exactly was it covering up? Logan's lips pressed into a thin line. Then he pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket and handed it to Shaq. Shaq opened it. It was a case file. A list of confiscated vehicles, all flagged as evidence in an ongoing investigation. His bike was on it. But it wasn't the only one. Shaq's eyes scanned the page. Half the cars listed were high-end, rare models. Vehicles that didn't just get stolen, they got moved, laundered. His pulse picked up. You're telling me they're running a smuggling operation? Logan nodded. And they've been doing it for years. Quietly, efficiently. Cars get stolen, enter police custody as evidence, and then... He snapped his fingers. They disappear. Shaq let out a low whistle. Inside job. Logan's eyes darkened. All the way to the top. Shaq's fingers tightened around the paper. He had heard of things like this before. Corruption, dirty cops moving product, people getting framed to keep the heat off. But he never thought he'd be the pawn in someone else's play. Logan shifted, rubbing his hands together like he was trying to warm them. But Shaq could tell. It wasn't the cold making him nervous. How long have you known? Shaq asked. Logan hesitated. Then, long enough. Shaq's jaw clenched. Long enough to do something? Logan let out a dry laugh, shaking his head. You think I haven't tried? He gestured to the empty dock around them. There are people in that department who would bury me if they even suspected I was standing here talking to you. Shaq narrowed his eyes. So why are you? Logan's jaw tightened. He looked away, kicking at a loose rock on the pavement. Then he exhaled sharply. Because they sent me to take you out. Silence. Cold. Sharp. Deadly. Shaq's stomach turned to ice. Come again? Logan's face twisted, like he hated himself for what he was about to say. I was supposed to make sure you went down for this. A clean setup. Make it look real. Let the media do the rest. Shaq didn't move. Didn't even blink. Then slowly he nodded. And yet, here we are. Logan laughed again, but there was no humor in it. Yeah, here we are. Shaq tilted his head slightly. So what changed? Logan looked up at him, eyes shadowed with something Shaq hadn't seen before. Jordan. The name sent a sharp pang through Shaq's chest. Logan continued, voice quieter now. Whatever he found, it made waves. Too many waves. Shaq exhaled, his fingers curling into fists. Where is he? Logan hesitated. I don't know. Shaq's patience snapped. Don't lie to me, man. I'm not lying, Logan shot back. I don't know where they took him, but I do know they needed him out of the way. Because whatever was on that USB drive. He nodded at Shaq's pocket. It's the kind of thing that gets people killed. Shaq inhaled deeply, steadying himself. Who? Logan blinked. What? Shaq's voice was flat. Who's behind all of this? Logan swallowed. Then, finally, he spoke. Captain Raymond Stokes. Shaq stiffened. The name hit like a wrecking ball. Captain Stokes wasn't just some cop. He was a legend, respected, untouchable. The kind of guy who shook hands with politicians and gave speeches about community policing. And now, he was the man pulling the strings. Shaq let out a slow breath. You sure? Logan nodded. Positive. A beat passed. Then Shaq let out a low chuckle. Logan frowned. What's funny? Shaq shook his head. It's not funny. It's just, damn. He exhaled sharply. All this time I thought I left this kind of life behind. Thought I played it smart. Kept my nose clean. He looked up at Logan. Turns out, I was just waiting my turn. Logan didn't say anything, because they both knew. This wasn't random. This was personal. Shaq looked out over the water, his mind working fast. If Stokes wanted him out of the way, it wasn't just about the bike. It wasn't even just about the smuggling ring. It was about Mercer. Mercer had power, connections. And now he had Stokes on his payroll. Shaq wasn't just a loose end. He was a threat. Logan shifted beside him. What are you gonna do? Shaq turned back to him. What do you think? Logan shook his head. If you go after Stokes, you better be ready. He's not the kind of man who leaves things unfinished. Shaq smirked. Neither am I. Shaq had spent years building a life he could be proud of. One that was supposed to be untouchable. No shortcuts, no backroom deals, just hard work and smart moves. But now, as he stood at the edge of a war he never asked for, he realized something. It didn't matter how clean you played the game. If the people in power wanted you gone, they'd find a way. And right now, they wanted him gone. By the next morning, the world knew everything. Shaq had leaked the contents of the USB drive to a trusted journalist, a woman named Lena Brooks, one of the few reporters who still cared about truth over headlines. Within hours, the story was everywhere. Breaking. NYPD Captain Raymond Stokes, linked to multi-million-dollar smuggling ring. Corruption scandal explodes. Businessman Donovan Big Shaq. Hayes framed to cover up police crimes. The public outcry was immediate. Protests erupted outside the police headquarters demanding answers. The mayor's office issued a no-comment statement, and Stokes, he vanished. Shaq wasn't surprised. Men like Stokes never stuck around to clean up their messes. But it wasn't over. Not even close. Because Stokes was still pulling strings from the shadows. Shaq had expected backlash, but nothing like this. Anonymous threats flooded his phone. His security team caught a man watching his house from a black SUV, engine running, waiting. His bank accounts were suddenly flagged for fraud investigations. Contracts for his businesses were being mysteriously pulled. They were coming for him, but Shaq wasn't running. Not this time. It happened the next night. Shaq was at his penthouse, going through security footage from his businesses, when his phone rang. Logan. Shaq answered. Tell me you got something. Logan's voice was low, urgent. You need to get out, now. Shaq's spine went rigid. What? They're not playing anymore, Shaq. Stokes knows you leaked the files. They're sending people to clean up loose ends. Shaq exhaled sharply. And by loose ends, you mean you, Mr. Everyone who knows the truth. A beat of silence. Then Logan said something that sent a chill through Shaq's blood. I'm taking care of it. Shaq's eyes narrowed. What does that mean? Logan didn't answer right away. Then, you wanted the truth out. Now it is. Let me handle the rest. Shaq's pulse ticked up. Logan. Whatever you're thinking. Shaq. Logan cut in, voice steady. You want justice? You want Stokes gone for good? Shaq's jaw clenched. Yeah. Logan exhaled. Then let me do what I should have done a long time ago. Then the line went dead. Shaq could have walked away. He could have packed a bag, left the city, started over somewhere far away. But that wasn't who he was. And more importantly, that wasn't what Jordan would have done. So instead of running, he made a call of his own. To Lena Brooks. Get your crew ready, he said. I've got something you need to see. The next morning, Captain Raymond Stokes was found at a private airfield, preparing to flee the country. And he wasn't alone. Logan was waiting for him. Security footage leaked to the press showed Stokes stepping onto the tarmac, only to be stopped by his own officer. A heated exchange, a document handed over. And then, Logan walking away, while federal agents swarmed in and arrested Stokes on the spot. The man who had spent years covering his tracks, untouchable, now sat in handcuffs on national television. And Logan? He disappeared. Shaq stood on his penthouse balcony that night, watching the city lights stretch endlessly before him. He had won, but at what cost? Jordan was still missing, Logan was gone, and Elias Mercer, still out there, watching, waiting. His phone buzzed. A new message, no name, no number, just 3 words. You're not finished. Shaq exhaled slowly, his grip tightening around the phone. Number he wasn't. Shaq uncovered the truth, but the fight is far from over. Corrupt forces are still at play, and the real mastermind is still out there. What happens next? Who can Shaq trust? And will justice truly be served? Stay locked in for the next chapter. Subscribe now and turn on notifications so you don't miss a single twist. What would you do in Shaq's shoes? Drop your thoughts in the comments and join the conversation.